The moment Adam lifted the envelope was the moment the world he knew began to peel. It was a Thursday, ordinary as any other, right up until the mail slot whispered doom. Tucked between the latest utilities and some lifeless coupon booklet was an unassuming white envelope, no return address, but the seal was stamped in deep blue wax. Odd, old-fashioned, and completely out of place, like finding a gold coin in a pile of spare change. He almost tossed it aside, almost. Instead, something told him to open it. Maybe it was the weight of the thing. Maybe it was intuition, that gut whisper we often ignore until it's too late. Whatever it was, Adam opened it, and everything began to unravel. Inside, one photo. Just one. A black and white print, glossy, fresh. It showed a much younger Linda, looking unmistakably radiant and barefoot on the shore of some beach Adam didn't recognize. She was leaning against a man Adam had never seen. Not just leaning. Clinging. Laughing. Her body language screamed intimacy. The man's hand was resting on her stomach with such familiarity it made Adam's throat tighten. And then, scrawled on the back of the photo in neat handwriting, asterisk, the real beginning. See, July 2003. Asterisk July 2003. Adam remembered it clearly. He and Linda had just returned from their honeymoon. She said she needed space that month, said she was overwhelmed from the wedding and wanted to spend time with her mother. Now Adam was staring at a version of her that didn't look overwhelmed. She looked euphoric. That night, Adam didn't ask Linda about the photo. He didn't accuse, didn't rage. He simply stared at her over dinner, watching how she twirled her spaghetti and laughed at something trivial on her phone. And he wondered, how much of his life was a lie. The next day, while she was out getting groceries, he took the photo to a friend in the force. Retired detective. One of those guys who knew how to dig without leaving footprints. Guy's name was Marvin, and Marvin didn't ask questions, he just took the photo, flipped it over, and said, "I'll find him." That was all Adam needed to hear. Because the smile on Linda's face in that photo? That wasn't a fling. That was the kind of smile you give someone who's fathered your children. And once that thought entered Adam's mind, it didn't leave. It spread like oil in water, seeping into every memory, every bedtime story, every night he'd kissed his children's foreheads and whispered, "I love you." He needed to know the truth, no matter how grotesque it turned out to be. What started as a single photo became a loose thread in a decades-long tapestry, and Adam. He was ready to pull. Because for 20 years, he thought he was living in a castle of trust. Turns out, it was built on sand. And the tide was coming in. He used to say being a father made him a better man, and he meant it every single time. Adam wasn't the type who eased into parenthood like it was a role you eventually settled into. No, for him it was instant, full force, no seatbelt. From the moment he first held little Emily, red-faced and wailing like the world had already disappointed her, Adam knew there was no turning back. Then came Sophie, 2 years later, quieter, wide-eyed, always watching. He adored them. Not the surface-level, Instagram caption kind of love, but the real, day-in, day-out kind. The kind that dragged him out of bed at 3 a.m. to hold a feverish toddler against his chest, whispering lullabies off-key while rocking back and forth on tired legs. The kind that made him miss his high school buddy's bachelor party because Emily had a dance recital, and she'd been practicing her little heart out in the living room for weeks. He remembered sitting in the front row with his phone aimed like a proud fool, cheering like she was performing on Broadway. Sophie was the reader. Quiet, bookish, always curled up in corners with fairy tales and later with heavy novels her classmates hadn't even heard of. Adam read to her every night until she insisted on reading to him. He never corrected her pronunciation, just listened with a smile, pretending not to notice when she'd fall asleep mid-sentence. Their lives were filled with those little moments, late-night pancake runs when sleep wouldn't come, building backyard forts that turned into overnight camping trips under the stars, and Sunday mornings when they'd race to see who could make the best omelet. Spoiler, it was never him. He remembered every parent-teacher conference, every tearful car ride home after a rough day at school, every awkward preteen conversation that left him wondering when they stopped being tiny creatures who clung to his leg and became these complex, evolving minds with opinions, secrets, and their own heartbreaks. He gave them everything. Not in the material sense, though he worked overtime, skipped vacations, and fixed the car himself when the alternator went out just so he wouldn't have to cut into the college fund, but in presence. He was there. Every scraped knee, every science fair, every forgotten homework assignment rescued last minute. He taught them how to ride bikes, how to change a tire, how to look someone in the eye when they shake hands. He thought about all of this while staring at that photo again, that cursed photo of Linda and the stranger on the beach, her smile brighter than he remembered it ever being with him. And the thought that kept circling back, the one that refused to fade no matter how many times he tried to blink it away, was horrifying in its quiet devastation. Had he been raising another man's children? And if he had, did that make those 20 years less real? Because every tear he'd wiped, every late-night run for cough syrup, every proud smile from the bleachers, those were his. Weren't they? Marvin called him 3 days later, voice low and dry, the kind of tone that told Adam right away he wasn't going to like what he heard. "Meet me at the diner," Marvin said, and Adam didn't ask which one. They always met at the same place, a rundown spot near the edge of town where the coffee tasted like it had been brewed during the Eisenhower administration. Adam arrived first, of course. He always did. He sat in the corner booth, tapping his fingers on the laminate table, eyes scanning the parking lot. When Marvin finally walked in, carrying that battered leather folder under one arm, Adam felt a strange mixture of dread and relief. Marvin didn't speak at first. He just slid into the booth, set the folder on the table, and gave Adam a long look like a man handing over a live grenade. Adam reached for it, but Marvin held it a second longer. "Are you sure?" he asked. Adam nodded. Marvin let go. Adam opened the folder. The first thing he saw was a grainy photo of Linda outside a hotel he didn't recognize. She was smiling. Not the smile she gave Adam after a long day, not the smile he saw when she opened birthday cards or watched their daughters graduate. This was different. Light. Giddy. A man stood beside her, holding the door open with one hand and touching her lower back with the other. Marvin said the guy's name was Charles. Worked in real estate. Divorced twice. No kids. And apparently very fond of married women. He and Linda had been meeting once a month for almost 4 years. Hotels mostly, sometimes restaurants out of town, and once a 3-day weekend in Santa Fe that Linda had told Adam was a nursing conference. Marvin had receipts. Literally. Hotel confirmations, room service charges, 2 movie tickets, even a dry cleaning bill. Adam stared at the papers, his chest tightening like someone had wrapped wire around his ribs and was pulling it slowly. But it didn't stop there. Charles wasn't the first. Marvin flipped to the next section, this one labeled 2009 to 2012. A different name. Marcus. Corporate trainer. Met during some leadership seminar Linda had attended for work. Same pattern. Occasional meetings, vague explanations, always just enough cover to avoid suspicion. Marvin had dates, addresses, and one photo that showed Linda and Marcus holding hands at a wine tasting. Adam remembered that weekend. He'd been home with a sick toddler and a leaky faucet. He could still feel the cold water dripping down his wrist as he tightened the wrench and sang softly to Emily, rocking her in the crook of his arm while Linda was clinking glasses in a vineyard with someone who wasn't her husband. Marvin kept going. Another name. Another timeline. Linda had been far more industrious than Adam had ever imagined. Some were short flings. Others stretched into months. Always carefully spaced. Always clean enough on the surface. She never left a trail he could see. But Marvin did. Marvin saw everything. Texts. Deleted emails recovered through software he didn't want to explain. Credit card charges that made no sense until you looked at them through the right lens. And then there was the most recent twist. A genetic test. Marvin had tracked down a lab. Quiet, discreet. No bells, no whistles. Just results. One simple sentence, bolded at the bottom. Probability of paternity, 0%. Adam stared at that line so long the letters started to blur. Marvin didn't say anything. He just sipped his coffee, waiting. The air felt heavy, like something sacred had been broken. And maybe it had. 20 years. 2 children. A life built on a foundation he never realized was cracked from the start. Adam closed the folder slowly, the weight of it somehow heavier than when it had been full. He thanked Marvin. Not with words, not right away, but with a look that said everything. Marvin nodded once. No judgment. Just quiet understanding. Outside, the sky was gray. It hadn't rained yet, but the clouds were gathering, thick and ominous. Adam stepped into his car, folder beside him on the seat, and for the first time in 20 years, he didn't know who he was driving home to. Or if he'd even go home at all. He didn't slam the door when he got home. He didn't throw the folder on the table or raise his voice like the script might suggest. Adam walked in quietly, the way someone might enter a museum full of fragile things. Linda was sitting on the couch, reading a book she'd already read twice, pretending to be at peace. She looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that once meant comfort but now felt practiced, rehearsed, like muscle memory instead of emotion. He sat across from her, folder in hand, and said her name once. Just once. She set the book down, her expression tightening almost imperceptibly. Adam opened the folder slowly, laid the photos out like playing cards between them. One by one. Hotel lobbies. Restaurant patios. Airport lounges. Always her, always with someone else. He said nothing. Just watched as her face shifted from polite confusion to a kind of brittle silence. She didn't deny it. She didn't ask where he got them. She didn't insult his intelligence with a story about old friends or business meetings. She looked at the pictures, then at him, and said the words like she'd practiced them in the mirror. I didn't think it would matter. He waited. Not because he was calm, but because he needed to hear all of it before deciding what to do with the storm inside him. She said it started after Sophie was born. She felt invisible. Overwhelmed. Disconnected. The days blurred into diapers and errands and exhaustion, and Adam, she said, became the man who paid bills and changed oil but stopped seeing her. She admitted to one man at first, then another. The details spilled out faster than he could process them. Some were brief, others longer. She said she didn't mean for it to become a pattern. It just did. Like breathing. Like hiding. She said Charles made her feel appreciated. Marcus made her feel exciting again. Others gave her things she couldn't explain, not even to herself. Adam listened, jaw tight, staring at the woman he once promised forever to, trying to reconcile her voice with the person he thought he knew. And then she said something that didn't match the others. She said she was sick. She didn't say what kind of sick, just that she'd been to the doctor twice in the last month and hadn't told anyone, not even the girls. She said she was scared, and ashamed, and most of all, lonely. She said she missed Adam. Not just the routines, but him. His presence. His steadiness. His quiet loyalty that she now realized had been the only real thing in her life. And then she said she missed being close to him, not just physically but as a partner, as a person who once looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Her voice cracked when she said that. Adam looked at her, really looked, and saw someone who was unraveling in front of him, thread by thread. He felt nothing. Or maybe too much. The room felt like it was underwater. He thought about the nights he'd read bedtime stories while she was out with someone else. He thought about college savings accounts, scraped knees, anniversaries spent watching movies while she stared at her phone. He thought about loyalty, the kind that bleeds without making a sound. When she reached for his hand, he didn't move. Not out of spite, but because he didn't know yet what forgiveness looked like. And he wasn't sure if he had any left. The silence between them stretched so long that the ticking clock on the wall felt like a taunt. Adam hadn't spoken in over 10 minutes, just stared ahead with the kind of stillness that made Linda shift uncomfortably in her seat. She was wringing her hands now, knuckles pale, eyes darting from the photos to his face and back again. Then, after what felt like a lifetime, she inhaled deeply, almost like she was preparing for surgery, and said something that peeled the last layer off whatever mask she'd been wearing. "I like it," she said, and the words hung there, awkward and sharp. "Being with other men. Not just the thrill or the secrecy or the chase. The whole thing. The idea of being wanted. The feeling of control. The sense that, for a moment, she could rewrite who she was." She said it wasn't about Adam. Not entirely. That he'd been a good husband, patient, reliable, a father their daughters adored. But something inside her had always been restless, long before she met him. She'd ignored it for years, buried it under baby bottles and carpool schedules and holiday dinners, but it never went away. And over time, it grew louder, harder to quiet. She said she tried to stop. More than once. That each time she promised herself it was the last, and each time she found herself falling back into it with someone new. She wasn't proud of it. She didn't enjoy the consequences. But there was a part of her, some damaged part, that kept chasing those moments like a person desperate for air underwater. Then she said the words Adam hadn't expected to hear. "I think it's an illness. Not metaphorical. Not a character flaw dressed up as poetry. A real condition. A compulsion. Something broken in her that she didn't fully understand but knew wasn't normal." She had been researching it in secret. There were support groups. Programs. Therapists who dealt with this kind of behavior, with people who felt like they were addicted to validation, to danger, to attention. She said she didn't want to lose her family, didn't want to keep living as two people, one smiling over dinner and the other vanishing into hotel lobbies. Adam still hadn't said anything, and Linda's voice was trembling now, afraid that the final admission had destroyed whatever thread of hope remained. But then he spoke. Slowly, evenly. He said if this was truly something she wanted to face, not excuse, not use as a shield, but genuinely confront, then he would help her. Not because she deserved it. Not because he owed it to her. But because the man he had been for 20 years wasn't built to turn his back on someone without giving them a chance to fight their way back. He said the damage she had done wouldn't be undone with a few therapy sessions and a new set of vows. That forgiveness wasn't a handshake. It was a slow climb with no guarantee of reaching the top. And he wasn't promising anything, not yet. But he was willing to walk beside her while she tried. Linda covered her face then, shoulders shaking, and for the first time in a long time, her tears weren't manipulative or calculated. They were raw. Frightened. Honest. And Adam, sitting across from her with a heart still full of unanswered questions, didn't reach out to comfort her. But he didn't walk away either. The first few months were surprisingly smooth, all things considered. Linda threw herself into therapy with the kind of energy Adam hadn't seen in years. She found a specialist in the city, someone who didn't flinch when she described her impulses, someone who gave it a name and a path forward. They attended a few sessions together too, awkward at first, but gradually the tension eased into something that resembled cooperation. Adam still kept his distance emotionally, he wasn't ready to crack open his heart again, but he gave her the benefit of effort. He watched her stick to her boundaries, avoid certain triggers, leave her phone in the kitchen at night, journal every day. She even told the girls she was getting help for something personal, didn't lie, just framed it with dignity. They respected that. Life found a strange rhythm, not normal but not unbearable either. Adam focused on work, kept his head down, spent time alone when he needed space. But then came that conference in Dallas, the kind of 3-day event with name tags and endless coffee, and one of the speakers, a consultant from Seattle, struck up a conversation at the hotel bar. Her name was Elise. She wasn't flashy or loud, just warm, sharp, and easy to talk to. They spoke for hours about everything and nothing, laughed more than he expected, and when she gently touched his hand during a joke, something inside him shifted. For the first time in a long time, he felt noticed in a way that wasn't tethered to old wounds or complicated history. That night, as he walked her to her room, the silence between them was heavy with an unspoken invitation. He hesitated. He thought of Linda. Of the progress. Of the work. But he also thought of 20 years spent holding up a house that was never fully his. He thought of all the lonely nights when he was faithful to someone who was slipping away piece by piece. And in that moment, he made a decision that wasn't about revenge or cruelty. It was about wanting to feel something clean, something unburdened. He followed her inside. She found out 2 days after he came back. He didn't lie. Didn't make excuses or bury it in silence like she had so many times before. They were sitting at the kitchen table, the same place where they discussed therapy goals and schedules and who was picking up Sophie from the airport, and he simply told her. Said it happened. Said he didn't plan it, but he also didn't regret it. He expected silence, maybe cold detachment, maybe even tears. But what he got was an eruption. Her face twisted, not with sadness, but with rage, the kind that doesn't simmer but detonates. She stood up so fast the chair scraped loudly against the tile, and her voice rose in a way he hadn't heard since the early years, before they both learned how to be polite in their distance. She accused him of betrayal, of hypocrisy, of ruining everything just when she was trying to make it right. She pointed at the fridge like it had committed a crime, at the therapist's notebook on the counter, at the family calendar, at everything that represented the effort she thought they were making together. He didn't interrupt. He let her shout, let her pace, let her throw his suitcase down the hallway even though he had no plans of leaving that night. Then she stopped suddenly, eyes wet and wild, and asked the question that cracked his composure. Did you enjoy it? And he told the truth again. Said yes. Not because it was better, not because he loved Elise or wanted anything more, but because in that moment, it felt like something was being returned to him. And that was when something shifted in Linda, something dark and electric. She stepped closer, too close, and said fine. Fine, Adam. If we're doing that now, then maybe I don't have to hold back either. Maybe I can stop pretending to be someone else. Maybe I can be who I am and drag you along with me. He barely had time to react before she kissed him, hard, with a kind of desperation that felt both familiar and foreign. It wasn't loving. It wasn't gentle. It was possession. As if she was reclaiming ground she thought she'd lost. That night, she clung to him like she was fighting off a storm, and he didn't push her away. Whatever they were doing, it wasn't healing. But it was something. Something loud and messy and unresolved. And for the first time since the whole truth came out, neither of them felt numb. The morning after felt different. Not clean, not peaceful, but like the smoke was finally starting to clear after a long, bitter fire. They sat in the living room, neither of them dressed for the day, hair unkempt, faces tired. Adam stared at the half-empty coffee cup in his hand while Linda curled her legs beneath her on the couch, eyes fixed on the window but not really seeing anything. There was no apology. No dramatic promises. Just the mutual understanding that what had happened couldn't be buried under guilt or denial. They talked, really talked, for the first time in what felt like years. They laid out the truth without dressing it up, her need to feel wanted, his need to feel free, the decades they'd spent holding themselves together out of duty rather than joy. Somewhere in the middle of it, Adam said he was tired of the lying. He was tired of pretending to be the perfect husband and father who never doubted anything, never felt tempted, never wanted to feel like a man separate from his responsibilities. Linda nodded, slowly at first, then more firmly. She said she felt the same. The secrecy had become a prison. The shame, a weight neither of them could carry anymore. So they made a decision. Not out of impulse, not in anger, but from a place of exhausted honesty. They agreed to never lie to each other again. Not about small things, not about where they were going or who they were with, not even about stray thoughts that came and went like clouds. And more than that, they agreed that if the opportunity ever arose, and only if it did naturally and without manipulation, they would allow each other a kind of freedom. Not chaos. Not carelessness. But the space to connect with someone else, briefly, occasionally, if it helped them feel whole again. The rules were simple: no secrets, no recurring attachments, and absolute transparency. If it ever stopped feeling respectful, they would stop. It wasn't about escaping their marriage. It was about rebuilding it on something other than fear and illusion. They both knew how strange it sounded. But they also knew what it felt like to pretend for 20 years, to live in a house where everything looked fine but nothing felt alive. Now, for the first time, they were building something real, even if it didn't look like what everyone else called normal. And in that messy, quiet way, it gave them something they hadn't had in a long time: hope.